The pink in the water bottle brings out your eyes, Ben. All right, we're live. Fantastic. Great. Thanks, Norm. All right. Good morning and welcome to a Bible class. Again, we're spending the summer looking at some controversial, difficult topic issues. So today we're talking about church and state, which is pretty simple, right? Good. All right. Since we're good Lutherans, whenever we talk about power and authority, we have to start here with the fourth commandment. And so we'll read this together. All right. Honor your father and your mother. What does this mean? We should fear and love God so that we do not despise or anger our parents and other authorities, but honor them, serve and obey them, love and cherish them. All right. And so again, that's how a recognition that power comes from God. God gives it to parents ultimately as authority, and then kind of works its way from there. And then the other distinctively Lutheran thing is that we talk about two kingdoms, which are similar to but not directly correlating to the idea of church and state. So do I have the definitions next? Yes, I do. Fantastic. Always fun to remember what I put here. All right, and I got these from the Lutheran Hour, We the Kingdom, or We the People, members of citizens of Two Kingdom bit. So some definitions as we talk about and think about church and state, especially church and state in an American United States context. When we talk about church and state, one of the issues that comes up is this idea, we call it ceremonial deism. Who's heard that term before? No, a bunch of blank stares. Okay, let's first go. How about deism? We'll start there and then we'll go back. Deism, okay, what's deism?
There's some kind of a God.
There's a God. We don't know anything about it, but yeah. And so yeah, the definition here, belief that God created the world but does not involve himself in everyday human life and does not communicate directly with people. The theme in the Enlightenment, around the time our country was founded, deism, it's kind of seen as a watchmaker God. That God kind of sets everything going, winds it up, and then lets it go and doesn't touch it again. And so this is some of how the rationalists at the time would be able to correlate this fact with we can't, we're focusing on what we can observe, so miracles don't happen, but we'll still believe there's a God, sure, because we don't have any better idea on how things started. So that's deism. There's a God, but it created everything and hands off and doesn't interact with us and is very much a generic God. So then ceremonial deism is the customary use of the word God in which the word has lost any religious significance through repetition over the years. And ceremonial deism permits God's name to be included in the United States motto and currency, yet remain outside of Establishment Clause consideration. All right, so so you remember we used to have this money in these little circle things, in these paper rectangles before everything was all ones and zeros. But when the money says in God we trust, what God is it? Ceremonial deism tells us that it can be any God. And that's how it gets around the Establishment Clause problems. So, we may read it and we may put in our idea of God into that word when we see that word. But other people aren't necessarily seeing the same God when they see that word God and think about who that God is. Does that make sense? Okay. So that's another thing we have to deal with and understand as we go through this. Democracy. Form of government where power is derived from the people either directly, direct democracy, or by elected representation, representative democracy. When the political science get real nitty-gritty on what kind of government things are, this is what we're talking about. Again, direct democracy would be if we voted directly on everything. We don't. And so we elect people to be our representatives. And then when we talk about church and state, especially in a United States American context, a lot of what we deal with are parts of the First Amendment, and the two parts that deal with this are the Establishment Clause and the Free Exercise Clause. And so the Establishment Clause is the provision of the First Amendment to the Constitution that prevents Congress from establishing an official state religion. So that's the government shall not establish a religion, and then nor prohibit the free exercise thereof is the Free Exercise Clause, the provision of First Amendment to the Constitution that prevents Congress from making any law that would limit the free exercise of religion. So those two things have to be balanced out. Federal government can't establish a state religion because as the founders were working on it, they've seen enough challenges with how things worked, Church of England predominantly, but other places too. So not a established religion, but the government can't stop, the government shouldn't interfere with religion being practiced. All right, that makes sense? Okay, and again, so a lot of the challenges we find in our country are just trying to balance those things. All right, and then again, a republic, form of government in which the people retain supreme control over the government through elected representatives. Theocracy, and we'll touch on this a little too, form of government in which God rules a nation through his laws and statutes. And again, that gets tossed around a lot as accusations. We're generally not there. I mean, there's a few countries that we talk about, probably Iran, the most predominant, as being a theocracy in terms of the religious people having actual power. You know, in England, you know, the constitutional monarchy with a state church, you know, you've got all sorts of fun government things going on because you've got the Archbishop of Canterbury having some political power, but not necessarily a whole lot. King Charles is officially the head of the Church of England, but you know, doesn't use that power much, and it's more a ceremonial power than anything. And of course, you know, the king, you know, has more ceremonial power than actual power in the way they're set up. But all right, and then again, as Lutherans, we talk about the two kingdoms. So Martin Luther's teaching that God rules the world through two realms, the earthly realm and the spiritual realm. Kingdom of the left, earthly; kingdom of the right, spiritual. All right, and the kingdom of the left is earthly governments which God utilizes his law to curb evildoers and lawlessness. So again, God establishes government. Just we always need to keep that in mind. So we tend not to be anarchists. But their job is to curb evildoers and lawlessness. That's you know, the use of the law as a curb just kind of keeps society on its rails. That's the goal of the kingdom of the left. And then kingdom of the right is the Christian church, in which God utilizes his gospel to forgive sins and make children of God through faith in Jesus Christ. So kingdom of the left, secular government's job is to maintain order, maintain peace. We, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, all those things. That's what the government does. That's not the church's job. The church's job is to proclaim Jesus Christ and him crucified for the forgiveness of sins. Is it the government's job to tell people their sins are forgiven, that Jesus died for them? No. Is it the church's job to tell people how they should, well, you know, tell the government how to do their job? Well, you know, you can be a prophetic voice, but usually when these kingdoms start trying to do the other kingdom's job, that's when bad things happen. So, all right, any questions on any of those definitions yet? Hey Norm, my remote's not working. Can you click back, see if that'll do it? There we go. All right. All right, any questions on those definitions right now? Yeah, no.
So the Pledge of Allegiance, under God, was added, I don't know, 50 years ago.
Right.
So that'd be an example of
the ceremonial deeds, right?
Ceremonial deeds.
Right. That is, the government can't establish a religion, we can talk about a generic God, and that passed the test, especially when we're trying to differentiate ourselves from the godless communists. But which God is it? That's a good question, and again, in the eye of the beholder. So again, we may see that, we may recognize that yes, we are a nation under the triune God, but someone else reading that will think it's maybe we're one nation under Allah, or one nation under the God of Abraham, or whoever. Again, generic God, not necessarily specific Christian. All right. All right. Oh, and then I guess I left it this way. Also, again, talking about definitions of things. One of the things in the news, of course, recently has been this idea of Christian nationalism, which is, again, not theocracy, but somewhat related. And I found this definition of what Christian nationalism should be, because, of course, like most things, Christian nationalism is defined as whatever someone doesn't like about the other side. You know, well, that's what your church people trying to control the government. That's obviously Christian nationalism, and therefore bad. You know, kind of like that. Well, that's woke. You know, anything that we don't like on that side is described as woke, so we can write it off. Christian nationalism is the same way, but let's use this definition. Believing these all five things to be a Christian nationalist. America was founded as a Christian nation. Again, there's some debate about that, because you have some founders that are Christians, some that are deists, some that are not many are actual atheists at that point, but close. And so again, there's arguments to be had both ways there. The U.S. government should promote Christianity as the official culture of the nation. Of course, then again, that's getting close to breaking the Establishment Clause. And whose Christianity? That's also always the fun thing when you try and do this. Like, if we want the Ten Commandments in schools, well, whose version of the Ten Commandments do you want? Because there are three different numbering systems, at least. So, Christians should actively take dominion over America to enforce biblical norms. Here, this is where we start definitely getting touchy. Christians in the U.S. should prioritize American interests over those of other nations, and Christians should fuse their national and spiritual identities into one. So again, some of these you could argue for or against as being part of, but if you have all five of these, you fit this definition of Christian nationalism. And what
I came up with when the Speaker of the House was voted in, and they said he was a Christian nationalist.
Right.
That became a darn good reason to make fun of it.
Yeah. So. Yeah, I mean, there's some things that are definitely that. I'm trying. There was an example of like someone wanting to pray before a meal as an optional thing, and that's obviously Christian nationalism because they're enforcing something. Or maybe it was like a stewardess saying, God bless you on their way out. I mean, so again, anything that we don't like, we can call Christian nationalism, but recognizing that it can actually be a problem. What problems could following those definitions cause for being an American or for being a Christian? Any thoughts on that?
If you're of another faith.
But yeah, right, again, that's so. America, not everyone in the United States is Christian. That's been, decreasing. Certainly, as the nuns keep rising, for example, and other people from other countries with other beliefs. So trying to make America Christian when it isn't and hasn't ever been fully all Christian can be a challenge. Sure. Anything else?
Definitely the last one, Christians should view their national and spiritual identities as one.
Right, yeah.
Very problematic for the Christian.
Yeah.
Your Christian identity should be first and foremost.
Right. Yeah, we are citizens of the United States, but we are also citizens of heaven. And yeah, which of those priorities should be, yeah, which of those takes precedence, and how do those work, that kind of thing. Yes.
Where'd you come up with that list? Where'd you find that?
I can send you the source. It's a book review by a Reformed scholar was writing about Christian nationalism.
I'm absolutely positive there's no such thing.
Okay.
There's no group, there's no website, there's no organization.
Well, it's not necessarily. It's not necessarily a directly organized group. There's some things. If I'd had time, I would have delved into more of the because with the Dominion thing, you start talking about the Seven Mountain Group, those kind of things. You get some kind of scary sounding stuff.
What was that first one you said?
It's Seven Mountains Dominion. It's a political philosophy theology that if Christians take control of the seven mountains of American culture, then they can reshape culture in their image and call it good. So, yeah. But no, I can send you the.
You know where the Seven Mountains idea comes from, too? Rome.
Okay. Yep.
From what?
But it's been co-opted by other groups, but it ultimately comes from there's seven hills in Rome.
Oh,
So.
right.
All right. And we might circle back as we go through some of these other things. All right. So again, when we're looking at biblical understanding of church and state and how we work together, we usually start with Romans 13. Could someone read this for us?
Let every person be subject to the governing authorities, for there is no authority except from God, and those that exist have been instituted by God. Therefore, whoever resists the authorities resists what God has appointed, and those who resist will incur judgment. For rulers are not a terror to good conduct, but to bad. Will you have no fear of the one who is in authority? Then do what is good, and you will receive his approval. For he is God's servant for your good. But if you do wrong, be afraid, for he does not bear the sword in vain. For he is the servant of God, an avenger who carries out God's wrath on the wrongdoer. Therefore one must be in subjection not only to avoid God's wrath, but also for the sake of conscience. For because of this, you also pay taxes, for the authorities are ministers of God attending to this very thing. Pay to all what is owed to them, taxes to whom taxes are owed, revenue to whom revenue is owed, respect to whom respect is owed, honor to whom honor is owed.
All right. So how are we to respond to governing authorities?
Respect, obey.
Okay. And this is only if they're nice, good Christian authorities, right? Because who's Paul writing about in Romans 13? Nero.
Yeah.
Right. Does Nero like Christians? I mean, it depends on the day, but no. I mean, he hasn't started using Christians as torches quite yet, but that's coming. So again, as we recognize that, again, governing authorities, even governing authorities that may be hostile to Christianity, they're still under God's authority and are instituted to keep the peace. All right.
How do you square that then, though? When the authorities start doing things wrong, like in Hitler's Germany?
Well, that's where the rubber meets the road is that way. What happens when the government starts doing wrong? Let's see. I've got Paul. We'll talk some of how Paul kind of manages that, but also that recognition that usually I pair this with when Peter and John appear before the Sanhedrin and are commanded to stop preaching about Jesus, and they say, well, no, we have to obey God rather than man. And so recognizing that when the government tells you to do something that is against your Christian beliefs, your Christian conscience, you don't have to do it. You may suffer a price for it, but that's how it should work. And then the church and again, there's also the difference between what should the church do versus what may individual Christians do in reacting to that. I mean, and of course, Nazi Germany had the whole state-church issue, so that was a challenge different things, and so different people found various ways to resist or to try and bring the church back in a variety of ways.
Can I give a more recent example?
Sure.
When I was in seminary, I checked the records of the old Western District, and there was a letter written by a young pastor in Montana to the professor in seminary, and most of the people that he was working with were immigrants from Russia that were German, and they didn't speak English, so he asked, can he preach them in German, even though the Montana legislature during World War I made the public use of the German language illegal? And the professor wrote back and said, it's more important for you to preach the gospel that the people can understand than to obey the law. That was my grandfather. He was a church in Helena, Montana. So,
Yeah. So and also that recognition that
no, he did, but he could have.
also that recognition that the United States government has not been, is not always, and will not always be friendly to Christianity in how.
And that wasn't against Christianity.
I mean, well, that's right. I mean, so that's, but yeah, that's why do a lot of Missouri Synod churches have a American flag and a Christian flag in their chancel? Because in World War II, when the Germans are the enemy, well, suddenly all these German Lutherans need to show they're good God-fearing Americans, so they put an American flag up front. And now, 100 years later, that causes other issues. One of those things we're warned about in seminary: if you try and move the flag without proper discussion, it's not going to go well. Like moving the piano or trying to change the color of the carpet. All right. So is obedience to God's will a confusion of the two kingdoms, though? Again, when we'll talk about this, and we'll probably keep coming back to this idea of, what do we do when recognizing we're citizens of these two kingdoms? Which takes precedence at the time? How do we work through some of these issues? All right. How do God's purposes for government enable the church to fulfill the Great Commission to make disciples of every nation?
Well, the government's supposed to help make a stable society.
Right, so they make a stable society. Right, how did the Roman government help the spread of Christianity? Roads, yes. Roads and peaceful roads, so they were able to travel all over the Mediterranean world fairly easily. Right. Also, you had, Alexander the Great beforehand, but between him and Rome, you had a common language over all these disparate areas of things. So if you're it may not be the person's native language or heart language, but if they all understand enough Koine Greek to get by in trading, then you can teach them about the gospel that way somehow. So, but yeah, that's also then one of the challenges of things is then sometimes that can though get in the way. An American has trouble getting into some countries that a Christian from another country might not have the same challenges with. I'm trying to remember what exactly the example is. I want to say it's like Christians from South Korea are able to get into like Iran or Vietnam or some other areas easier than, an American can't go there, but a Christian from another country. All right, so what rights and responsibilities do you have as citizens of this country?
As far as what?
What? I heard a couple not always like what the speed limit is, but we should probably follow, right? We may not like to pay what we're paying in taxes, but we need to. Okay, anything else, either rights or responsibilities?
Right to live where you want.
Right to live where you want, okay. Yeah. You know, I mean, government has restrictions in terms of zoning laws and other things, but there's, yeah. Okay.
Right to worship.
Right to worship, right. Again, that's part of that, free exercise clause. We have the right to gather together and worship. Not everyone in every country has the freedom to be able to do that. Any other thoughts there?
How about when a person's arrested?
What?
How about when a person's arrested?
When a person's arrested, right. What do the police have to do when they arrest you? Read your Miranda rights, right. You have the right to remain silent and right to attorney, all those sorts of things. Yep. All right. What rights and responsibilities do you have as citizens of heaven?
Honor God.
Okay, honor God, yeah,
Love
that's
our
a responsibility.
neighbors, serve.
Yeah. Serve others. Yeah, love God, love your neighbor. Okay, anything else?
Preach the gospel.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, preach the gospel.
We also have, like, as a right, like, we have Christian freedom to worship, like, how we want to and things like that.
Okay, yeah, so we have Christian freedom that, we have to gather for worship, and some Christian freedom in how we do that. Yeah.
Are they getting in trouble with that in Canada? There's some things going on in Canada.
Oh, it varies. Yeah, I mean, I think every so often I hear something about it's usually usually a pastor preaching against homosexuality or abortion, something like that. They're able to see verging on getting into political speech more than religious speech, and so they get into trouble that way. I mean, or some depending on how each state and place handled some of the COVID restrictions very differently, and so how you balance those out of we're supposed to be able to gather together. Government says we can't gather together in the way we normally do. How do we balance that out? And in loving God, loving our neighbor, those sorts of things. And some would say, oh, we just obey government and we're not going to meet in person at all. There's some who say, well, God tells us to worship, we're going to worship. Who cares what the government tells me? And a lot of things in the middle. We found ways to be able to do things in different ways that still provided what was needed. Keeping both things in mind. All right. And how do your rights and responsibilities as citizens of heaven and citizens of the United States contradict or complement each other?
The laws of society tend to be the same as the laws of God.
Laws of society tend to be the same as laws of God. Well, yeah, sure. At least partly, right. Yeah. I mean, when I'm talking with my confirmation kids, the first use of the law, the 10 Commandments. Again, why do we want them in schools? Well, why are they in courthouses and things? Because we follow things. Don't kill, don't steal, don't lie, don't break your promises. Don't commit adultery. Those things are pretty universal, or at least should be. It's the first couple is where you get into sticky issues. And again, how you number them. Because the big ones is Lutherans number them, so we have 2 covenant commandments at the end. The Reformed have it so so the first one split up into not only just there's one God, but also no idols, and no graven image, and so that plays in the thing. So then, when you're talking about commandments, sometimes Oh, wait, that's not the right number. Well, it's because you're working off a different sheet. You're talking about the same thing but different numbers, but. All right, again, some of what Paul does to use his citizenship. Could someone read this for us? Acts 22, 22 to 29.
Up to this word, the Jewish crowd listened to Paul. Then they raised their voices and said, "Away with such a fellow from the earth, for he should not be allowed to live." And as they were shouting and throwing off their cloaks and flinging dust into the air, the tribune ordered him to be brought into the barracks, saying that he should be examined by flogging to find out why they were shouting against him like this. But when they had stretched him out for the whips, Paul said to the centurion who was standing by, "Is it lawful for you to flog a man who is a Roman citizen and uncondemned?" When the centurion heard this, he went to the tribune and said to him, "What are you about to do? For this man is a Roman citizen." So the tribune came and said to him, "Tell me, are you a Roman citizen?" And he said, "Yes." The tribune answered, "I bought this citizenship for a large sum." Paul said, "But I am a citizen by birth." So those who were about to examine him withdrew from him immediately, and the tribune also was afraid, for he realized that Paul was a Roman citizen and that he had bound him.
All right. So how does Paul use his Roman citizenship here to point out an injustice to be committed by the Roman tribune in Jerusalem?
Just asked a question and made them
Right.
think of it.
Yeah. So Paul, as a Roman citizen, had a lot of rights and responsibilities, and so he uses that here when again he's appeared he's come back to Jerusalem. He's brought some Gentile Christians with him. There's concern that he's brought uncircumcised men into the temple courtyard. That's at least part of why there's this Jewish crowd. Again, this is a whole other level of church and state issues, right? And so that's why. So the Romans grab Paul to figure out why he's the source of this riot, and then Paul uses his citizenship here and appeals to Rome, so that. And so then he's protected from flogging, because you don't flog a Roman citizen. We'll see elsewhere. I think we'll skip through it, but that's how Paul gets to Rome. He gets this all expenses paid trip to Rome because he appeals to Caesar. So he gets sent to Rome there, and then gets stuck ministering to, or having the chance to talk to all of Caesar's household and all of Caesar's guard for a while, that kind of thing. When he's finally killed, because he's a Roman citizen, he's beheaded instead of crucified, because you don't crucify a Roman citizen. So there's some of those things going on. All right, yeah, and that's Paul appeal to Caesar. All right. So if you're thinking about church and state and decide you don't like how things are going, would you be more inclined to shake the dust off your feet and go somewhere else like the Pilgrims did? Or like the Saxons did? Remember, why did Walther and the rest of the Saxons come to Missouri and end up being the catalyst to found the Missouri Synod? Because the Prussian Union was trying to unite the Lutheran and Reformed and say, we've got one state church. And people are saying, but we don't believe the same things. And the government said, too bad. You have one church. You're all worshiping together. And so some of the Saxons said, no, we don't believe that, so we're going to go where we can do that. Or do you think you'd stand your ground, risk punishment, or worse, even martyrdom? Just kind of a thought exercise, quick. And we can move on if we need to, but.
That's probably a different question for, each individual here.
Oh, yes, definitely. Different question for, right, how much stuff do you have to fit in the U-Haul if you're moving somewhere else, right? Yeah. Oh, yeah. Okay, go ahead. No, okay. All right, something worth thinking about.
And
Yeah.
would either of them be, acceptable as far, as far as God is concerned, your relationship with your Lord and,
Right.
okay, do you really
Well-
want me to stay and face
Right.
or should I retreat and,
How does God get the Christians to scatter from Jerusalem? Yeah, so Jesus says they're going to be my missionaries, my ambassadors, my apostles from, you're going to go from Jerusalem to Samaria to the ends of the earth. But they're all still hanging out in Jerusalem. So what happens? There's persecution ramps up. Some stay, some go. And as they go, they bring the message with them.
dispersion?
So I mean, again, so both of those are acceptable. We find that in other times in the Roman Empire that Tertullian, a 2nd century bishop, says the blood of the martyrs is the seed of the church, because when people see the government persecuting the Christians and they realize that the Christians are the ones who are taking care of the poor and doing all those sorts of things, and that they're not doing the things that the government normally persecutes people for, then they start to wonder what's going on. And if there's what's really going on, why these Christians are willing to go through these persecutions. All right. How do we work within the civil realm to change laws we don't like?
Get active in your community.
Active in your community, okay, yep. Anything else?
Run for office.
Run for office, sure. Why not? Vote. Contact your representatives, your senators, your president, your city council members, whoever, to do what they need to. And when do you think civil disobedience is necessary?
When the government is doing is wrong.
Government's doing you wrong, okay.
You have to kind of listen to your conscience.
Listen to your conscience, right?
See what God is telling you. Might be a lead.
All right, when some religions make outlandish claims, does it ever become the government's responsibility to step in?
It's illegal.
Okay. So, and so the examples for this is, sort of like permitting the Amish to be exempted from the draft and from healthcare laws.
They were.
Yeah. But then the challenge becomes, the Texas measles outbreak has been traced to a group of Texas Mennonites who don't believe in vaccinations. So, they have the religious freedom to not be vaccinated, and how do you balance that out when it becomes?
They really don't have the freedom to give it to everybody else.
Well, yeah, and so that becomes the challenge. How do you balance those sorts of things out?
Are the Amish exempt from draft or from fighting?
Or from fighting, I suppose. Right?
I'm asking.
Yeah.
Because the way around that is to say, well,
Right.
we'll permit you not
Yeah.
to combat it.
Right.
Norm,
Was it?
Norm can speak to this. Norm,
Norm, pay attention.
Norm, can you talk about conscientious objections?
Well, there are basically two forms. There's one form which is sort of an absolutist, where you refuse to participate in any way in the military, and then there is the form where you would be assigned some non-combatant position, like helping the medics
Right.
or being a medic or something like that.
Yep. Is it Hacksaw Ridge, the movie about the objector? Yeah. Christian scientists who don't believe in blood transfusions or immunizations, things like that. Let's see. Since we're running out of time, just a couple things. May have heard IRS recently adjusted rules about endorsing political candidates from the pulpit. Is that something that should happen? Why or why not? So in general, it's been, we can talk about theological issues or political issues in general, but not specific candidates in particular.
The adjusted rules, which way?
Adjusted so you can.
Really?
You can, yeah.
Really?
Right. And I mean, it's been waffly on both sides. I mean, you watch Republican candidates showing up at churches and Democrat candidates showing up at other churches. You know, for some reason they're never at the same church, but you've got a captive audience, a lot of people, so, you know.
I'm not going to church to hear about the politics.
Right. Yeah. Again, the two kingdoms. What's the job of the church? The kingdom of the right. Preach Jesus and crucify Him, forgiveness of sins. The politicians up there, are they doing that? Probably not. They might. It's entirely possible that they might. They're probably focused more on getting themselves elected.
This church had an issue when Lutherans for Life gave a list of politicians that way.
Right.
And we refused to show it because we felt it wasn't something to be done in church.
Yeah.
People were encouraged to do research and look at it and make their own decision. But it really, and that was before the IRS rules.
Right.
I was concerned. There's this, because of the Missouri Synod policies, you don't do those things.
Right.
And that wasn't just a government thing, that was the Lutheran understanding.
I guess a different understanding of the two kingdoms. But on the same hand, I mean, I'm trying to remember. I don't know that I've ever made it, but you've gone to the Pastor's Day at the Hill a couple times, right?
Yeah.
So, and Lutherans for Life and Lutheran Family Service they have a list of who in elected office is Missouri Synod, and all pastors go and meet with them and pray with them and hear about. And it's usually life issues, issues that are happening at the State House. So again, that's that active citizenship we can do. But once we start mixing the messages, that's where bad things happen. Speaking of that, I talked about this a little last year. That's one of my seminary classmates, Jim Remke. He's a pastor in Wisconsin, who gave a benediction at the Republican National Convention last year that was held in Wisconsin. He kind of went viral because before he gave it, it was a standard Lutheran benediction. You know, did a Trump impression of, you guys are going to be so blessed by this. But his impression was slightly better than that just was. But then he got some flack not only for participating in a political thing, but also the RNC, despite promising him that he would be the only person on stage, had a Sikh priestess and some other people from other religions around him, and so there were some issues there too. But again, so how do we balance that out? As citizens, we can participate in things, but participating in an active, official church way and mixing church and state that way can be an issue. Or, we see statements like this get passed around on Facebook too, that love neighbor, welcome the stranger, stand up for the marginalized. Is that a political statement or a theological statement or a biblical statement? Or so often you hear things, about someone's reading the Beatitudes and, from the Sermon on the Mount, someone says, Pastor, we can't do that. That's too political, telling us to do those things. All right, we're about out of time, or we're a little past time. So, any final thoughts, questions, comments? All right. Well, great, thank you. And then, what are we doing next week?
Next week is, oh gosh.
Sorry to put you on the spot. So,
No. Oh gosh. I have it.
he's off duty, he doesn't have to preach.